Hello children and welcome. The topic for this video is friction, class 8 subject science, and this is part second of the videos that we are making for this topic, friction. Topics to be covered. So in the part 1 video, we learned about what is force of friction, what are various factors affecting friction, and why is friction a necessary evil. In this part, which is part 2, we would see how do we increase and reduce friction, how do wheels reduce friction, and what is fluid friction. Increasing and reducing friction. So in the previous video, we had seen that why friction is so important in our day-to-day life. We won't be able to walk or even write if friction was not there. So there are cases when we want to increase friction. Let's look at some of the cases or how is the friction increased. So the sole of the shoe. Grooves are provided on the sole of the shoe so that it has a better grip. Or brake pads are used in the brake system of vehicles or your bikes. So when you are riding a bicycle, the brake pads at that time they do not touch the wheels. But whenever the brake lever is pressed, they arrest the motion of the rim due to friction, and that's how the wheel stop to move. Or there are some examples like you would have seen kabaddi players or gymnasts. They apply either some soil or some coarse material, coarse substance on their hands so that friction is reduced and they get a better grip on the opponent. However, in some of the situations, friction is not desirable and we want to minimize it. Let's look at some of those situations. So we all would have played carom board. So before playing, we always sprinkle powder on carom board. Why do we do that? So that the friction is reduced and the coins are moving smoothly on the board. Or we pour oil on the hinges of the door so that the door opens or closes smoothly. Or in industry where there are machines, we use grease in the moving parts of those machines. All of this is done to decrease or reduce the friction. Now, how does applying oil or grease reduces friction? So whenever we apply oil or grease between the moving parts of a machine or any two surfaces, a thin layer is formed. So in this figure, if you see, there are two surfaces, surface 1 and surface 2. Now whenever we apply say oil or grease, a thin layer is formed between these two surfaces which avoids direct rubbing of these surfaces. Because of this, the interlocking of these irregularities between the two surfaces, like we had seen in the previous video, what happens here is now because a thin layer is between these two irregularities on the two surfaces, so these do not interlock with each other and the movement becomes smooth. Now these substances which reduce friction, say like oil or grease, these are called as lubricants. In some machines, it might not be advisable to use oil as lubricant, and sometimes even an air cushion between the two moving parts can be used to reduce friction. Wheels reduce friction. On this slide, we'll see how does wheels reduce friction? But before that, just a question. What do you think? Can we reduce friction to zero by polishing surfaces or using large amount of lubricant? No, friction can never be entirely eliminated. Why? Because no surface is perfectly smooth. How much ever you apply lubricant or oil or grease or keep on polishing, some irregularities will always be there. So we can never eliminate friction, but we can reduce friction. Now we are going to see how does using wheels reduce friction. So what is rolling friction? Now when one body rolls over the surface of another body, for example, this luggage which has wheels, when someone is trying to drag this over, say a floor, the resistance to the motion or the force which is applied in the opposite direction, that is called as rolling friction. So there is rolling friction, however, that rolling friction is still very much less if we try to compare it to sliding friction. Rolling always reduces friction, and that's why it is always easier to roll than to slide a body over another. Now imagine if this boy was trying to slide this luggage. What would be easier, sliding the luggage or dragging this where the rollers are fitted? Obviously, if the rollers are fitted, it is much easier for the boy to pull this or drag this luggage. Now, since the rolling friction is smaller than the sliding friction, that's why sliding is replaced in most machines by rolling the use of ball bearings. Ball bearings reduce friction. And you would have seen these ball bearings are used between the hubs and the axle of your bike, and then the ceiling fans, and in almost all the machines that we use. Let us see now what is fluid friction. We know that air is very thin and light, and although it is thin and light, yet it exerts frictional force on objects moving through it. In the same way, water and other liquids exert force of friction when objects move through them. Now in science, the common name of these gases and liquids is fluids. So more generally, we can say that fluids exert force of friction on the objects that are in motion through them. This is called as drag. So one example can be thought of like a ship or a boat is moving in the water. So there would be some force which is exerted by water on the movement of this boat or ship. Now this force of friction is called as drag. So the fluids exert force of friction on these objects which is called as drag. Now the frictional force of an object in a fluid depends on certain factors. So it depends on its speed with respect to the fluid. So if it is going fast or slow, the frictional force would depend on that. Or it would depend on the shape of the object. Whether it is say round or square, it would depend on that. And it depends on the nature of the fluid itself. Whether the object is moving in water or air or some other liquid, depending on that, the frictional force would change. Now we know that when object is going or moving through this fluid, it must overcome this friction, and in this process they lose energy because of friction. So our effort always is in the direction to minimize the friction. So for this purpose only, these objects are given special shapes. So can you see the similarity between the shape of an aeroplane and a bird? Yes, they look quite the same. And in fact, all vehicles are designed to have shapes which will reduce the fluid friction. So with this, we come to end of part 2 of chapter friction. Thank you.